that's gunfire. Okay, we've just come under attack. Under attack.
They escaped with minor injuries. US troops found another arms cache in central Baghdad this morning. And this afternoon there are reports that almost 300 recovered Iraqi missiles have been found, which tested positive for chemical agents. They're also reported to have captured Saddam Hussein's half-brother close to the border with Syria. The US Secretary of State warned Iraq's neighbour against helping members of Saddam's regime escape, and he said the US was not going to appoint a new Iraqi leader.
This operation will come to a successful end when there is a new government in Iraq that has been decided upon by the people of Iraq, not imposed by the outside forces or the coalition. And when the people of Iraq have forsworn any support of terrorism, when there are no more weapons of mass destruction, and when they are committed to using the wealth of Iraq for the benefit of the people of Iraq and not to develop weapons or to threaten neighbors, then we will have closure.
In Baghdad, hundreds of former government workers queued up to be appointed jobs by the US military in an effort to restore some sort of order. Close by, angry Iraqis protested, calling on the Americans to do something to restore water and electricity supplies. In the second city of Basra, where former Iraqi policemen are on patrol with British forces, order is slowly being restored, with Iraqis also getting their first taste of free press in decades.
The first time they've had newspaper from outside that hasn't been directed by the Ba'ath Party and hasn't been Saddam's message.
It can't be easy for people here to see former Iraqi policemen return to the streets, even after being vetted by UK forces. But such is the desire for order, they seem willing to give them a chance. Keith Doyle, 5 News.
Rescued by US Marines, 7 American prisoners of war emerged from helicopters on an airstrip near Baghdad 3 weeks after being taken captive. 5 of them ran from the helicopter to waiting transport. 2 others, who are believed to have suffered some injuries, walked slowly across the tarmac. The 7 were rescued after their captors apparently fled from US Marines, advancing on Saddam Hussein's crumbling northern bastion of Tikrit. 2 are Apache helicopter pilots. The 5 others are soldiers from the US Army's 507 maintenance unit who'd been paraded on Iraqi television after being captured when their convoy made a wrong turn in the southern city of Nasiriyah and was ambushed by Iraqi forces. US Commander General Tommy Franks said it was only by chance that they were picked up.
I don't have the full content of the way they were picked up, but what I'm told is that someone came up to our Marines who were moving along the road headed toward Tikrit and said, here shortly you're going to come in contact with a number of Americans, and just so you know they're there. And so the tip came from an Iraqi.
The US military this evening confirmed that all 7 had been rescued and that their families are being notified. Margaret Fjord, 5 News.
And the American commander is confident resistance will be disorganized.
Seems to me like it's okay. There is no remaining army under command and control of this regime, no Navy, no Air Force, and so forth. So we feel very good about that. But the use of the term where we say, okay, regime is totally gone, well, I think we'll be thoughtful before we use that.
Now it's the roads out of Tikrit which are blocked by the US and its allies, determined to prevent Iraqi leaders escaping. Of the 55 most wanted on America's deck of cards, Watban Ibrahim Hassan, Saddam's half-brother, was reportedly captured on the road to Syria. Another half-brother, Barzan al-Tikriti, is thought to have been killed on Friday. Ali Hassan al-Majid, known as Chemical Ali, is believed to have been killed in Basra on April the 7th. And yesterday, Ammar al-Sadi, Saddam Hussein's chief scientific advisor, gave himself up. But the aces in the pack are still at large. Saddam Hussein's sons, Uday and Qusay, are still unaccounted for. And so, despite many rumours, is their father. The core of the regime, the figures regularly seen grouped around Saddam Hussein, have just disappeared.
War released. Some wounded but said to be in good condition. They're shown climbing onto the tarmac at an airbase in southern Iraq. Among them 5 members of a maintenance crew that ran into an Iraqi ambush and 2 Apache helicopter pilots whose aircraft was shot down. For the family of Chief Warrant Officer Ronald Young, this was the news they desperately waited for. Back home in Georgia, they realized he was safe when they were shown the pictures.
He realized that going in there, a lot of them were not going to come out. And he talked about my mom and dad. The last time he saw them, he had tears in his eyes.
And these are the last images of Sergeant James Riley, seen by his family, a prisoner of war, terrified and paraded on Iraqi television. Scenes that caused outrage in the United States. But he too is now safe.
I'm happy, but I still can't believe it. When I touch him, I'll know it's real. Or see him.
Also among those freed, Shoshana Johnston, another of those shown on Iraqi television. US authorities say they were found after being abandoned by their captors on the road between Baghdad and Tikrit. Private Jessica Lynch, dramatically rescued by US commandos, was part of the same maintenance company. She's now returned home for further medical treatment. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
Speak English. Sounds like you speak English to me. Who do you work for?
And a glimpse today of what some of Saddam's fighters were planning. 40 vests found at a school in Baghdad, designed to be worn by suicide bombers, each containing plastic explosives and ball bearings. The war may now be all but over. The looting, though, goes on. We found these people ransacking the German embassy here and loading what they'd taken onto a stolen double-decker bus. Trying to stop the looters, there are armed vigilantes on the streets. They're local residents who threaten to shoot anyone who dares to steal their property. These people say they have no choice but to defend themselves until law and order has been restored here and there's a proper police force back on the streets of Baghdad. These Iraqis have been exercising their newfound freedom to demonstrate, demanding that the Americans do more to help them protect their property and bring back power and water supplies. The Americans have started recruiting police officers, engineers and doctors in an attempt to get post-war Baghdad back on its feet. It won't be quick and it won't be easy, but at least it's a start. And tonight, a heartwarming sight for many Iraqis. Thousands of people who had fled Baghdad because of the war now coming home to their city, ready to resume their lives in the new Iraq.
American armor moving towards the oil city of Kirkuk. The aim to secure key installations and end the insecurity that continues to plague cities freed from Saddam's rule in northern Iraq. Kirkuk itself is now relatively calm, with American troops guarding the governor's office and stationed in key parts of the oil fields, at refineries and wellheads. But in the other northern city, Mosul, the anarchy goes on. This man is one of scores of victims of inter-ethnic violence between Arabs and Kurds. He was brought to a hospital that is now guarded against looters by Kurdish and American troops. The hospital's chief doctor is contemptuous of coalition statements about the results of the war.
They speak frankly. It is freedom. Freedom to loot. Freedom to kill.
Outside in the streets, there is gun law. Checkpoints manned by armed civilians have sprung up as Arabs seek to defend their property from the victorious Kurds. The vigilantes deny supporting Saddam Hussein, but express anger about their situation.
No one to protect us. Is this liberation? No, this is occupation.
The checkpoints have managed to recover a small percentage of the goods stolen by the looters. A crazy assortment of items ranging from computers to dentist chairs is now stored in local mosques. In this city, the power of the Saddam regime has been broken. But instead of a flowering of democracy, it seems that virtually every street is full of men with guns. The coalition will have to act swiftly to restore stability if the operation, which has been named Iraqi Freedom, is not to be badly tarnished. Julian Mannion, ITV News, in Mosul.
Right across the city, they're still at it, district by district, street by street, literally tearing the old system apart. Baghdad is being consumed by looting. The old world is being cleaned out. Nothing is sacred. In this street, it's the turn of the National Theatre.
They are looting everything, they are selling everything, destroying everything. I don't know why. Goodbye.
And nearby, it's the same story at the Ministry of Trade. It symbolises the chaos that exists within this city, that this building has simply been left to burn because there's no fire service available to put the flames out. But in another district, one faithful servant of the British Embassy is doing his best to keep the looters out. He's watched over it with his son for 12 years since it was closed after the first Gulf War. Nahadim Rahim opened the gates for us to show us for the first time the world he's been protecting, a little piece of Britain with the gardens overgrown, but otherwise completely intact.
3 days ago,
Looters tried to use a crowbar to get in, but he chased them off and has since nailed the doors shut. Inside, everything is as it was, but covered with a decade of dust. The Nafi was an obvious target, but there hasn't been any beer here for years. Outside, a foxhole in the gardens, where, according to Mr. Rahim, Iraqi police were dug in. But this is now a happier place, where children find sanctuary to play. Out in the city chaos, there is still unfinished business. A surrendering Iraqi soldier, attacked by a crowd, angry at the regime he defended. Like many here now, he has found a different voice. Tim Rogers, ITV News, Baghdad.
They're not wearing their old uniforms. That would associate them too closely with the old regime. But this is Basra's new police force. Backed up by British troops, these policemen's first post-Saddam duty was checking the details of drivers coming in and out of the city centre.
What we're trying to achieve is liaise with the civilian police service, try and get it up and running once again and show a presence on the ground, just to show the local population that there is some form of normality returning to their city.
Basra has been plagued by looting and robbery over the last few days. Establishing a police presence is an urgent priority.
A week ago, these streets were a battlefield, and these troops were involved in the fighting. Now their role has completely changed. They're trying to rebuild some kind of civilian authority in this lawless city.
Targeting the ringleaders of the Ba'athist regime while leaving much of its infrastructure in place to run post-war Iraq is a key part of coalition strategy. But simply re-employing the old personnel has caused anger here.
People here afraid of the policemen because they are the men of the wicked President Saddam.
Re-establishing civilian authority in Iraq was always going to be very difficult. But to guarantee the security of this society, coalition soldiers may have to stay here a lot longer than perhaps their commanders had hoped. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Basra.
Hotel, and that firefight is still going on. The Palestine Hotel is where all the journalists and the Marines are based in Baghdad. And in the past hour, we have started hearing some shots, and then we heard the Marines shooting back, much more fire. And then we were told by a sergeant here who's with the Marines that they believe that there were 5 people with guns inside one of the buildings just behind the mosque out in the circle outside the Palestine Hotel. It's about 200 meters away from where I'm standing. And the sergeant said that they believe it's 5 people. They are not sure, but that's what their estimate is. In the past hour, we also saw the Marines using flares, trying to illuminate the sky in order to see better where the fire is coming from. We did also see, well, not ourselves, but colleagues of ours, other reporters in different positions on this roof. We have different, we can see different areas of the circle outside the hotel. And from their point, they told us they saw some people being arrested, but we are not sure that those people are actually the people who have been firing at their Marines, because the fire, we can still hear shooting, and we can still see that the Marines are shooting flares. So obviously they don't believe that this firefight is over yet.
The battle for Tikrit is proceeding about as planned. They say they are only meeting limited resistance, although we're only getting limited information from the battlefield. Still, the fighting in Tikrit and firefights that are going on in Baghdad both underscore the fact that while the U.S. is winning all the battles, the war is far from over.
Move our way following fires here out of Tikrit.
If there was any question, Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit was the last stronghold of his Ba'athist Party loyalists. It was answered when CNN's Brent Sadler ventured into the city in a convoy of media vehicles.
Checkpoint. Okay, that's gunfire. Okay, we've just come under attack. Under attack. We're okay, we're okay. Under fire. That confirms our worst fears.
But Sadler also saw deserted vehicles in military installations, a clear sign that all but the most die-hard defenders had abandoned their posts in the face of a U.S. Marine advance.
When last I checked, this force was moving on Tikrit, and there was not any resistance.
While Tikrit appears on the verge of falling, the U.S. isn't close to declaring an end to what it calls Phase 3 combat operations.
Iraq's a large country, and so there are lots of places in this country where we have not physically had our soldiers. We know that there are pockets of foreigners in Iraq who have decided to fight to their last breath.
The U.S. still doesn't know the status of Saddam Hussein or most of the 55 top leaders pictured on playing cards distributed to U.S. troops. Sources say one of Saddam's half-brothers, Watbat Ibrahim al-Takriti, was captured trying to escape across the border to Syria, where the U.S. fears other senior leaders may have received refuge as well.
We certainly are hopeful that Syria will not become a haven for war criminals or terrorists.
Saturday, the regime's top science advisor, General Amir al-Sadi, turned himself in Baghdad, insisting still that Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction and that he knew nothing of Saddam Hussein's fate.
Where is Saddam Hussein?
I don't know. He's either dead or he's running a lot.
The U.S. will soon begin to sift through the rubble left by an April 7th airstrike that targeted Saddam Hussein and his sons.
Do you have DNA of Saddam Hussein?
Oh, of course.
And his sons?
Of course.
You do?
Of course.
So you'll be able to confirm, make a positive confirmation if in fact he was in that building?
Well, unless remains were removed.
The U.S. also has a massive challenge to find chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, which were the primary justification for the war. There have been plenty of false alarms and some promising leads, but so far, no smoking gun.
You're talking about 2,000, 3,000 perhaps distinct places in this country where we know we're going to go and investigate each one of them.
General Tommy Franks is planning to make a visit to Baghdad perhaps as soon as this week, about the same time that a group of freed Iraqis will be meeting in Nasiriyah to begin to sort out the transition to civilian rule in their country.
Tanks and hundreds of Marines are reported to have reached the central square of Saddam's hometown. The latest video phone pictures from the Arabic channel Al Jazeera. It says local people are cooperating with the Marines in tackling pockets of resistance where Fedayeen and Arab fighters from other countries are shooting from hospitals and schools. Reporters on the ground say the city is tense, but surprisingly quiet.
I'm in Tikrit, actually inside it. I've just been inside one of Saddam's numerous palaces in this city, along with a group of American soldiers who were clearing it. They found it to be completely empty, including the furniture, which was looted last night just before they got there. American armoured vehicles now just rumbling forward down this main road towards the centre, and a reasonably tranquil, though tense situation. I mean, it is a combat zone. The American troops are ready to open fire at a moment's notice. There's one of them just ahead of me, inside what was the guard box of a Saddamist checkpoint. There are American soldiers in there sort of peering through the open windows of that down the road with their rifles at the ready. But so far, or at the moment, there is no sign of resistance in this particular area of Tikrit.
The final assault came overnight after days of aerial bombardment. The Marines launched a three-pronged attack on the city. They're reported to have faced 2,000 troops in Saddam's last stronghold. Many deserted before the battle began. A reconnaissance group with an NBC News team was ambushed as it headed towards the city. The Marines returned fire with laser-guided weapons, killing 2 Iraqis.
The Americans will be looking for the resistance that we are anticipating in Tikrit itself. And the bottom line is, I believe that it's still some way from being secure, but we're making every effort to ensure that it is for the people of Tikrit as quickly as possible.
The Americans hope to find members of Saddam's family, but local people are reported as saying they left at the start of the conflict. They're also seeking high-ranking military leaders and documentary clues to the whereabouts of alleged chemical and biological weapons. Fears of a gas attack have abated because the organisation needed to maintain armed warheads appears to have been wrecked. But the Americans and British continue to insist that the raw materials for weapons of mass destruction do still exist.
Baghdad may be under American control, but the fighting hasn't stopped. Overnight in the centre of the city, a heavy gun battle between US Marines and snipers. The firefight happened outside the Palestine Hotel, home to many Western journalists. Firing went on through the night. After a lengthy search, 3 gunmen were arrested and later taken into the hotel for questioning. One was reported to be Egyptian, although that hasn't yet been confirmed. But there are clearly non-Iraqi nationals opposing British and American forces. Al Jazeera has broadcast interviews with wounded and captured fighters from around the world. This man claimed to have come from the Lebanon.
I came from Lebanon as an Arabic volunteer. I want to assure you that all of the groups of comrades that I was with have died fighting the Americans. Whoever is left, I just don't know what happened to them.
On the streets of Baghdad today, protests about the violence and lawlessness plaguing the city. Peace there may be, but no security yet. But there are encouraging signs. As many as 2,000 former police volunteering to come back to work to protect people and property and restore order. To the northwest of the capital, reports of fighting in Al-Khaim on the border with Syria. An industrial complex there was inspected for chemical weapons before the war. The head of Iraq's chemical weapons program, General Amer al-Sadio, is in American hands. The head of Iraq's nuclear program, Jafar al-Jafar, has also surrendered. So the Americans now have the people they need to track any weapons of mass destruction. But the focus appears to be turning away from Iraq to Syria. America suspects Syria has chemical or nuclear weapons programs and is not mincing its words.
We believe there are chemical weapons in Syria, for example, and each situation will require a different response. And of course, first things first, we're here in Iraq now, and the second thing about Syria is that we expect cooperation.
Syria continues to angrily deny the accusations, and even Britain, America's staunchest ally, does not see Syria as the next target. Foreign Secretary Jack Straw making that clear in Bahrain.
So far as is, quote, Syria next on the list, we have made it clear that it is not. There is no next list, and the Prime Minister, British Prime Minister Blair, in the House of Commons last week said that he knew of no plans for Syria to be, quote, next on the list.
The strongholds of the conquered Iraqi regime are still giving up their secrets. Today, a fleet of 20 luxury cars found in Baghdad City Hall. But of the primary targets, the ever-elusive Saddam Hussein and his weapons of mass destruction, there still remains no sign.
Baghdad to Tikrit within the last 24 hours. In this attack toward Tikrit, the force met little resistance in the towns of Baquba on the east side of the Tigris River and Samara. And I'll just point those out again. Baquba on the eastern side of the Tigris River along the Diyala, and Samara along the Tigris River further to the west. The attack continued yesterday, and its first efforts were to isolate Tikrit from the south, from the west, and also from the north, as well as a key bridge in the center of town that crosses the Tigris River. This morning, the attack entered Tikrit, securing the presidential palace there and also beginning the search for any remaining regime supporters. And this is really the only significant combat action that occurred within the last 24 hours. Elsewhere, coalition land forces are actively engaged in setting the conditions for a stable Iraq. Among the challenges are disposing of all the materiel of war purchased and stored by the regime for use in the defense of Baghdad. As coalition forces move to secure more power stations, water facilities, and hospitals in several zones of the city, they often uncover or are guided to significant amounts of ammunition, weapons, aircraft, and vehicles used by the regime. In one example, coalition forces found 12 surface-to-air missiles and 6 VIP helicopters near a Ba'ath Party headquarters building. Other examples include 51 Iraqi trucks that were loaded with ammunition, several buildings and bunkers also loaded with ammunition, with many more truckloads worth that would need to be moved and disposed of. And this is artillery ammunition, tank ammunition, and missiles. Despite these challenges, the coalition is working diligently and is contributing significant assets to restore function and to distribute aid in Baghdad. We've contributed considerable assistance in helping Iraqis restore the power and water service that ended when Baghdad was still under regime control and that was destroyed by the regime forces as they fought our coalition. The land component has organized several engineer teams to assess and facilitate restoration of services throughout the country. In Baghdad, two very important locations are the power plant that services all of western and southern Baghdad, and also the water treatment plant in the south of Baghdad that provides safe water to the communities. And those are highlighted to the west and just south of the bend in the Tigris River. In the following photos that I'll show you, coalition military engineers have met with senior Iraqi power industry officials